create like a nice divider. I'm trying to decide right now if it's just an eyesore or if it adds.
If we could do something like we did at Christmas.
I feel like less is always more.
I concur.
How long have you been a vegetarian, and if it happened at a separate time, a vegan?
Okay.
For?
So I have been a vegetarian for 22 years, and I've been, or 21 or 22 years, and I've been a vegan for 18. I became a vegan in the year 2000, so it's easy for me to remember that. Yeah, so it's been a really long time. And when I first became a vegetarian, my grandma cried because she thought I was gonna die. And when I became a vegan, people would be like, "Can I catch that?" I said, "I hope so." But nobody knew what it was, and now it's so common for people to recognize what a vegan or a vegetarian is. But at the time, which wasn't that long ago, people.
So you were doing it before it was cool?
Totally did it before it was cool. I did most things before they were cool. I'm just like that.
Nice.
So.
Pastor Gary, can you just give us some background on your family farm?
I mean, I was born on the farm. I was born with my brothers and sisters. The farm has been in the family since 1866. And so it's just and the one next door, which is my cousin's farm, has been there just as long. The two brothers came over in the 1800s from Sweden and bought the land. And so, that's why I come to church at 4 in the morning, 5 in the morning, because you were used to getting up at 3:30 in the morning to milk the cows, feed the chickens. All that stuff had to be done before school, after school, and as the daylight got longer in the spring and summer, you were out in the tractor. I was driving tractor when I was 5, things you wouldn't be able to do today.
Right.
Couldn't do it today, but you had to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I wish I could have learned that habit of getting up so early. As you guys know, I don't have it. What is the ethical and theological foundation for that big life choice about what you eat?
Yeah, so when I was growing up, I read Francis Moore Lepay's Diet for a Small Planet. And in it said that during every major world famine, grains were being exported to developed nations to feed cattle. Animals take so much more resource to raise for food, as far as water and grain and all of that, and people are starving. And so that dichotomy, that system, the way it worked, I didn't want to be a part of that. And then I started looking at the ecological realities of what I was eating and what was most sustainable. And then I, in turn, started saying, I grew up with farmers and I grew up with hunters. And I said, if I couldn't do it myself, I probably shouldn't eat it. So I am more than happy growing cabbage and yanking it from the ground. I'm not so good at killing Bambi. And so I figured if I can't do that myself, I probably shouldn't benefit from it. I want to know where my food comes from. I want to be connected to it. And so those were the choices. So it was kind of 3 levels. But first it was a humanitarian piece. And then it was followed by the environmental realities, and then from there kind of just a love of animals and a recognition that trying to live nonviolently and recognizing that's just not something within me, and recognizing also that I have the privilege of that not being something within me because I have other options, but I come from a family of omnivores and family that raised steer and chickens and grew corn and tobacco and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, I cast no shade. I am all like everybody's just trying to do the best they can with what they got, and everybody's making their own choices to try to align with their values and their faith, and that's how mine lined up. But everybody else is on a different journey, and I respect that.
And I see the same thing, but on the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
Where being a family farmer, coming from a family farm, that we're not abusing the animals. We were raising them to sustain the family, sustain small business, and that because animals produce manure, we can create the grain. We grew alfalfa, we grow hay, so they feed themselves. We can grow our own vegetables and not so many fruits in Minnesota, but our own vegetables, and so we become sustainable. Yeah. So we have small business that keeps smaller farmers in business as well, and the animals are raised in a humane way. And I know that some people don't see the fact that you kill animals as being humane, But we see it as a gift of God as well. In the Old Testament, the offerings, the sacrifices are always animals. We see that in the New Testament as well. And so we see that, but it's in a small way of sustaining family farm, sustaining family and neighbor, and also then helping the environment so that we're not abusing and you're always giving back. There's a constant, it's the circle of life, right? The circle of life. So you have the grain that grows to feed the cattle that grow to feed the grain, and so forth.
And I think the struggle is, and we talked about this briefly before, the struggle is that there are these two food systems. So there's the sustainable food system, and that's great, and you want to be a part of that, but it can be really hard because the mass-produced, the Tysons, the Purdue's, these large factory farms that are incredibly abusive to animals, that are incredibly abusive to the environment, that ruin water systems, that are abusive to people as well. I mean, when I was in South Dakota, the meatpacking industry is really big there, and they would go down to Guatemala, they would bring a whole bunch of people up, they would force them to work these absurd hours, they would get raided, everybody would be sent back to their home country, they pay the fine, which was cheaper than paying people a fair wage and actually giving them rights as workers, and then they'd go down and just collect a whole bunch more people that they could abuse. And so it's so hard to navigate these systems and to say, yes, I'm making these ethical choices. I think it's easier when you live around those choices. But in New York and in the city, It's so hard to say, oh, this piece is ethical, this is part of a system I want to support, and this one isn't. I think there are more resources out there to figure out what's what now than there ever have been, but it's rough. That's a really hard one.
And it's becoming even more and more difficult for the small farmer. When I was growing up, when you were growing up, somebody with 40 acres or 80 acres could live. But now we have 1,600 acres and you can barely make it, because the corporations are so pervasive and are so destructive, both of the animal as well as the plant industry. And so they're destroying everything that you have. But, not only we don't always kill the animals, like chickens, cows we have for milk and cream and cheese. But those aren't cared for either in the corporate system. Everything is forced. And so the food becomes just another product in a plastic wrap, rather than something that you can care for and that is healthy for you, is organic, is natural. And so it's the same thing on both sides, I think.
Well, and it's funny. So a lot of people will become vegetarians, they'll become vegans, and they'll come and say, oh, I'm hungry all the time. And I say, what are you eating? And they're like, I'm eating spaghetti, and I'm eating these like fake vegan burgers, and I'm like, that's not real food. No wonder you're hungry, right? But that's also food that we don't know what it is or where it comes from because it's so processed. I had one of my parishioners was telling me a story about her granddaughter coming to visit, and she wanted mashed potatoes. And so her grandmother took out the potatoes, she started peeling it, and she said, no, Grandma, I want mashed potatoes. She said, yeah, this is mashed potatoes. She said, mashed potatoes come from a box, Grandma. And she just looked at her and was like, oh, honey, she said, I gave her a big hug. So I was like, how? My granddaughter only thinks mashed potatoes come from a box. How horrible is that? But that kind of disconnect, it's pervasive. It really is. And it's not, I don't think it's in any way, shape, or form what God had in mind.
It's not. It's like the eggs on the farm that we have when we sell, because that's a major thing, that my mother has done for 80 years. You sell eggs, but the cartons that they're in are biodegradable. Everything, because you can do that on a small farm.
Yeah.
It becomes more difficult when you get to the corporate end. It's more expensive for us, but it's the right way to do it.
Because you're able to make the choices to say this is the right thing versus just simply this is the bottom line.
Exactly. It is bottom line because it is part of how we have our income, but it's not bottom line that we're in the competition with everybody else.
Shouldn't the bigger companies have more of a financial cushion to make more responsible choices, though?
They do.
They just don't.
They just don't make those choices.
They could. They're actually more able to because there's less risk of those higher costs.
And they can buy things in bulk so they can save it. We can only buy a case of biodegradable egg cartons. They can buy them by the gross and much cheaper. But
even in the farm bills, like if you look at the farm bills that have been rolled out, the loopholes that are there for corporations, the amount of kickback that they get that allows them then to buy out the smaller farms and to take over their property, and it's so incredibly unethical, and the system that we have is very much one we've built. I mean, we can lament it, we can say, oh, I can't believe it, this is so horrible. At the end of the day, we vote it through all the time, and people tend for convenience. People tend to go for convenient rather than what is right, and what is right is usually what's harder, whether that's saying I'm opting out of the system, I'm going to live in this way, in a different way, or saying I'm going to be very intentional about the system that I'm a part of. We're two examples of how you can live intentionally, but I think it would be much easier for both of us to just say, we'll go to McDonald's.
Exactly.
More gross, but definitely easier.
but living in New York City, I think one thing I find the farmers markets. I live by Union Square, so we have the biggest farmers market.
Yeah.
But I think those are really great and sustainable, and we need to continue enforcing those because mostly they are sustainable farmers.
Yep.
Whether it's for vegans or vegetarians or omnivores,
Mm-hmm.
it is sustainable, and we're supporting the local person who's growing the food, and you know where it's coming from. You know how it's been grown. You can talk personally to the person. You can name the cow or name the cabbage head.
Mm-hmm. Joel and I are part of a CSA, so we get community-supported agriculture. We get a box every week, and that box actually is on a sliding scale. So depending on what you make, they accept different levels of payment. But the food comes directly from the farm. There's option for eggs and milk as well. We get that from June through November, and then they actually offer a winter share that just ended for us. So we eat seasonally then. We're not forcing it. Our food isn't traveling long distances, which is a whole other carbon footprint piece. When you want strawberries in January, strawberries don't grow around here in January, and so the environmental impact is huge.
Because they're traveling a really long way.
They're traveling a really long way. So it gives us an option to eat seasonably, to know where our food is coming from. And the farmers actually write to us, and they come in and they'll say, oh, this is what happened today. And we share in the risk too then. So if a crop is damaged due to a blight, right? So our CSA a couple of years ago, there was a big tomato blight. We got almost no tomatoes over the summer. We're still paying the same CSA amount, but that means that farmer isn't losing money because of environmental impacts beyond their control. Because we say, no, we want to partner with you in this because this is important.
So two follow-up questions. How does one participate in a similar kind of CSA program? And then also for you, next, when is the Union Square market?
So the CSA, it's pretty simple. Ours is Windflower CSA, but there are a bunch of CSAs throughout the city. And in fact, my uncle actually is part of a CSA in Pennsylvania that delivers to New York, which I think is funny.
That's
but,
cool. Wow.
Yeah, but it's more his is more downtown, so we're not members.
And some of our churches participate in them, which my church in Brooklyn does.
So we go to Broadway Presbyterian to pick up our box, and we go in. We know the people. We pack our bags. We pick up our box of food, what have you, and bring it home. The boys get to go through and pick out of the bins what they want, and it's really fun. And then we also volunteer there at least twice throughout the season. So then we're giving out to people and we're getting to know people in the community, which is great. So there are a lot of those options. And then we also on Thursdays and Sundays up at Columbia, there is a farmer's market year round. And so on the off season, we stop there for things that are grown in greenhouses or for apples, potatoes. We try to eat, again, seasonally, so a lot more squashes and onions and things of that nature. But that helps us through that interim time, which is nice.
Cool.
Yeah.
And what about the Union Square Farmers Market?
Union Square is on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday.
Wow, that's a lot.
It's a lot, and it's huge.
It's awesome.
It's huge. It's awesome.
Wednesday, yeah.
It's just fun to walk around.
It is, but we have, as you mentioned, Danielle, we have the Columbia, we have 59th Street, they're all over the city. But Union Square is the best, I think. It's the biggest.
Yeah, and some of the green markets also accept green bucks, and so they're really pushing in the city to make it affordable and accessible for people. So folks can use their benefits and things at these farmers markets. There's one right across from the hospital Joel works in the Bronx that he sends patients to all the time and says, do your shopping there.
There's a great one in Grand Army Plaza, downtown Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah?
Yep.
Really?
Monday, Thursday, Saturday. Yep.
Wow. And they're like, these, it seems like these are frequent enough that whatever day you're available, you can do shopping. You can probably find one.
Yeah.
Exactly.
which is
Yeah.
pretty cool. Is there anything that you guys want to add that hasn't come up in the conversation?
I think
on Camping?
one thing for me, Kevin, is that whether you're a vegan, a vegetarian, or a carnivore or whatever, I think as long as you do it sustainably, you do it ecologically, and you care for not only where the food comes from and how it is packaged or processed or not processed, even better, and the person or the people who've grown it, I think that's the most important thing.
It's funny you say that. I was going to say that so often people feel guilty or people feel attacked. I can't tell you how many times I've told people I'm a vegetarian, I'm a vegan, and people get really defensive. That is how I choose to live my life. And everybody is trying to figure out how they are going to live their lives. And so recognizing wherever you are on that journey, it's great that you're thinking about it. Don't let guilt stop you from trying new things or from being content and saying this is where I am and this is what I'm comfortable with in this moment in this time. But don't be afraid to question. Don't be afraid to do those things. I think ultimately it's trying to live your life in such a way that you do no harm, right? And how you discern what that looks like. I think we can continue to ask those questions, and I know I still do. It's not like I say, oh, done, I figured this whole thing out. Not at all. All the time I'm asking those questions. So yeah, don't let guilt stop you. Also, don't feel that everyone's judging you. Take your time.
Right.
Figure it out. Like, we're all on this journey. All that being said, if there is a part of you that's feeling uncomfortable, I think that's important too, because those moments of discomfort within us, we have to look at those and say, okay, where is that leading me? So instead of just saying, well, I don't want to question this, I don't want to feel uncomfortable about it, I don't want to be upset about it, I'm just going to pretend everything is fine. It's so important for us to recognize what that kind of healthy discomfort is that leads us into making different choices in our lives.
Yeah, don't just push it down.
Right?
That's right, exactly.
So don't feel guilty, don't feel pressured, but also don't be complacent.